right, folks, it's time to lock, load, and light up your target because today on Trigger Happy Tactical Podcast, we're diving headfirst into the world of pistol red dots. Are they the greatest thing since sliced bread or just another overpriced gimmick? We're breaking down the pros, the cons, the different types, and most importantly, how to pick the right one up without having to sell off a kidney. So charge those batteries, zero those dots, and let's fucking send it. All right. So let's get down to the nitty gritty and talk about pistol red dots, or as we call them, RDS, red dot systems, red dot sights. What are they? Well, they're basically a non-magnified optic that uses a projected reticle, right? Usually a red or sometimes green dot, and this projects up on a window, and this helps shooters quickly and accurately aim their firearms at objects. Well, unlike traditional iron sights, which require alignment of the front and rear sights, equal height and equal light make an equal sight. And if you're in any of my classes, you've heard that before. That's right. Equal height and equal light make an equal sight. I am like the fucking Dr. Seuss of guns when you really think about it. And I'm writing a book soon of Dr. Seuss isms for guns, 1 gun, 2 gun, 3 gun. I'm really not. That would probably be a really bad book if I wrote it. But anyways, if you want me to rewrite that book, go ahead and make a comment down somewhere or throw me some fan mail and maybe I'll make that book for you. But anyways, unlike traditional iron sights like we talked about, which require alignment of the front and rear sights, a red dot simplifies this process. It puts a dot on the target and that says, pull the trigger. Where the dot is, the bullet goes. Red dots work by reflecting an LED onto like a specially coated glass lens, well, usually glass, making that reticle visible to the shooter, but most likely not to anybody else, right? So it should be just so that the shooter can see the dot, but looking from the barrel side, you shouldn't be able to see that dot signature on most of them. This design allows for faster target acquisition, better visibility in low light, and more intuitive shooting, especially while under stress. Red dots come in a variety of different sizes and styles, from like enclosed emitter optics like that Aimpoint Acro, or open emitter designs like the Trijicon RMR. They can be found on anything from rifles to shotguns, but in recent years, they've become a serious game changer for handguns. It's kind of trickled down from rifles and shotguns, making its way onto handguns. And this is really helping us make rapid and precise shooting much easier than ever. So let's kind of talk about what a pistol red dot isn't, right? What are the expectations of these things and how does it sometimes let people down? Well, a red dot is not a magic AI-powered aimbot. If you slap one on your pistol and you expect to instantly shoot like John Wick, you are in for a rude awakening. While red dots can improve your accuracy and speed, they still require proper fundamentals like a solid grip and good trigger control. You still have to have your basics down pat when you're running with a red dot. It's not magically going to help you perfect your shitty fundamentals. You have to have good fundamentals in order for this to work properly. A red dot is also not a magnified optic, right? If you're looking for some sort of like zoom, you're going to need something like a scope or an LPVO, and boy, that's going to look really goofy on your Glock 19, isn't it? Red dots really are designed for fast target acquisition, not for super precision shots at extreme distances. It's really, when you think about it, a red dot is not really even an optic. It's really just a way to confirm that you're on target, meaning I shouldn't treat it like it's a scope or something like that. I should treat it like it's a confirmation device. It's basically when I see that dot overlaying, that's confirming that I am aiming correctly and that I can shoot that. Basically, think of a dot as point shooting with confirmation. And if you're unfamiliar with point shooting, we'll kind of talk about that in the next episode when we go into how to shoot with a red dot. But that's really what a red dot should be thought of, or an RDS should be thought of, is merely a shot confirmation device, not a scope. A red dot is also not maintenance free. Unlike iron sights, which don't rely on any electronics, a red dot runs on a battery, and it can fail if you don't take care of it. And let's face it, these things fail at the worst time. You got to keep spare batteries, you got to keep the glass clean, and you got to make sure your mounting screws are torqued properly. Because nothing kills confidence while you're shooting, like your optic flying off mid-range session and smoking you in the face. Trust me, I see this all the time. The amount of red dots that end up smacking people in the face, or the amount of red dots that end up forward the line while shooting because they just simply fell off, or when people can't hit the broadside of a barn because they didn't realize that their screws loosened up and their dots wiggling all over the place. So you've got to keep those things properly torqued and make little hash marks on them so you know if they've moved. And finally, a red dot, it's not for everybody. It really isn't. Most people in classes, I could put into a red dot and they will shoot better if they're doing it correctly. But I do got to say, it's not for everyone. It's for most people, but not everybody. While most shooters will swear by them, some will still prefer the simplicity and reliability of iron sights. There are some people that have been shooting iron sights for so long that you put them in a dot and you've changed that perspective and they just hate it. It's a resistance to liking it, but that makes them not want to use it or not shoot it or not practice with it. So for you, it might not be the right thing. Personally, though, as an instructor, I always tell people, start with your iron sights first. Get perfect on your iron sights, right? Learn how to use those because they're the more difficult method of sight alignment. Learn how to use those properly. And then when you've got those basically perfected and down pat, then throw a dot on, right? Because if you do that, then you're using it as a shooting enhancement. You're using it to find your target acquisition faster. You're using it to enhance your already good shooting ability. But most people I find where they first start to shoot and they throw a dot on right away and they don't learn how to shoot with that dot, they're using it as a crutch for shitty shooting. I mean, that's just how it is. So get good at shooting first, then throw a dot on and use that to aid you. Now, is that for all circumstances? No. There are some people who just can't get iron sights down, and it could be a vision thing or something else where putting a dot onto their gun just magically enhances their ability to shoot, and it happens. It really does. But if you're not willing to put in the time to learn and practice with a red dot, this thing might not be the right tool for you, be totally honest with you. Now, let's stop things here for just a second. I do want to throw a pitch out to today's sponsor for this podcast. Again, it is D5 Ranges Marengo. If you're anywhere in Northern Illinois, Southern Wisconsin, take the time and stop by D5 Ranges Marengo. It is the most badass gun store, training facility, and shooting range you'll ever go to. It's located in Marengo, Illinois. It has 2 floors of retail for guns accessories, ammunition, knives, cool swag, all sorts of badass stuff with a badass selection and awesome prices. They also have 2 floors of shooting ranges that are 180 degree shoot capable with full battle walls, which is badass in itself. And let's not forget a 2-story, 360 degree live fire tactical shoot house. That's right, badass. So if you get an opportunity, stop on by D5 Ranges Marengo or check them out online at d5rangesmarengo.com or check out any of their socials. If you also want to see yours truly here, I do have our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube's and type in D5 Ranges Marengo and you see yours truly over there. All right, let's jump back into the show and talk about the pros and cons of RDS or red dot systems. Let's start off with the pros. Well, first pro is going to be the one that I like the most. It's faster target acquisition. There's no more having to line up those front and rear sights. You put that dot on that target, you press that trigger, which really helps our brain understand really fast. Dot is where I want bullet to go. I pull the trigger once it overlays where I want it to go. This also makes it really great for follow-up shots. Right? No more having to take the shot, it recoils up, and then bringing the firearm back down again, line up those iron sights, and then shoot. You shoot, once that dot floats back down to where you want it to be, you instantly press that trigger again and rinse and repeat. The other benefit about that is you only have one place to focus. Your focus is going to be threat or target focused, meaning that thing that I am trying to shoot or that thing that's trying to harm me, I am locking eyes onto. I press that dot up and into my line of sight. And when that dot overlays where I want that bullet to go, I simply press that trigger. Unlike iron sights, where I have to press that out, I have to now line up my sights, equal height, equal light, make an equal sight, and I have to pick what I need to focus on. What do I focus on? Do I focus on that rear sight? Do I focus on the front sight? Or do I focus on the threat? And I can't focus on multiple different distances. My eyes just don't allow it. So when I'm shooting irons, in general, I focus on the front sight, making everything else sort of blurry. Well, that can be problematic under a dynamic critical incident or fight or flight, right? That stress of somebody trying to harm us. Most likely our brain will want to lock eyes onto that target. And we'll talk way more about that in the next episode about how to shoot with a red dot. It can improve our accuracy, right? This is a single aiming point, which helps us reduce sight alignment errors. I don't have to line things up. I just got to have the dot on the target, making precise shots even easier, especially at slightly longer distances. Right? It's going to give me the ability to see the target, focus on the target at that distance, and just let that dot again overlay. It also gives us much better situational awareness. It allows us to keep both eyes open. Unlike iron sights, where we've got to close an eye, right, so that we get that focus. And now, obviously, we try to train out of closing one eye, but sometimes we just have major eye dominance issues where we have to shut down one eye when we're pressing out with those iron sights. And we start to lose that 220-degree field of view we get with both eyes open. And even when we're shooting iron sights with both eyes open, we have this tendency to stare out at that front sight, which takes away the 220 degrees and usually reduces us down to just a tick over 100 degrees of field of view. Whereas with a dot, if you're using it correctly, you're keeping both eyes open, which now allows me to see out of my peripherals, and I have a much bigger field of view to say, is there a threat coming from another direction? Awesome. Or it's helping me know where I have to go to next to maybe find a new point of cover, barricade, or concealment, right? It's also very good in low light. These things work really well in dim conditions where iron sights can simply just disappear. Think about that, right? If I've got a pair of black iron sights pressing out, yes, maybe I have tritium sights, but those can go bad. They can deplete. I might have fiber optic, but what does fiber optic need to really glow? Some sort of ambient light, right? Whereas with a dot, it doesn't really make a difference. That dot is going to be there. It also pairs well with weapon-mounted lights or night vision. If you have a good dot, it will usually have a night vision setting, which will let you drop the dot down so low that it'll be picked up by your night vision, but it won't be so bright that it blows out your night vision goggles. So they work really well in dim or almost no light conditions or with nods, right? Dots can be much easier for people with aging eyes, right? Let's face it, we're not getting any younger. So red dots can dramatically help with our eyes getting worse. No need to focus on a 2 millimeter wide front sight and a little sight blade on the back. If your vision isn't what it used to be, a dot can make shooting much, much easier, right? Because all I got to focus on is this little dot, right? Can I see the dot? Well, even if the dot's blurry, okay, I still know that it's transitioning and it's falling over the front of my target, which means I know I can take that shot. There are a lot of times where I cannot get a student to focus on their iron sights because their aging eyes just don't allow it. And then I put a dot in their hands and it's a world of difference or a world of improvement. And even if it's not age that's causing eye issues, but you still have some eye issues, sometimes a dot just makes life a whole lot easier for you. And let's face it, dots are more modern and they're more fun, right? Let's be real. They're cool and nothing makes you feel more like the Terminator than a freaking red dot. They really are awesome. And, you know, it's funny because you listen to people talking in the gun store, you listen to people talking on the range and you'll hear them, hey buddy, what kind of dot you got over there? And one guy's like, yeah, Trijicon SRO, you know, puffs his chest because, you know, he's a badass with a Trijicon SRO. And the other guy goes, yeah, well, I got this off of Temu and the glass fell off of it. But it's cool anyways, right? So it does become kind of a bragging right. So those are the pros, and there can't just be all pros with red dots. Just like everything in this world, there's a pro and there are cons. So let's talk about the cons. But what you got to do is you got to figure out, do the pros outweigh the cons for you? So what are some of the cons with a red dot system? Well, first things first, it's the electronic device. If it can fail, it'll fail at the wrong point of time, right? It's battery dependent. Unlike iron sights, red dot sights need power, right? A dead battery at the wrong time equals a real big problem. That means you got nothing, right? So they've got batteries, they've got circuit boards, they've got screws to adjust your windage and elevation that can cause a problem. They're mounted via screws, which can cause a problem. They've got an LED. That LED could be a problem, right? So they're dependent. They're electronic devices, right? Whereas iron sights, they're there. They're trusty. Yeah, you always know they're going to be there for you, kind of thing, right? They're just that good friend. Dots have a hell of a learning curve. If you're used to iron sights, finding a dot quickly can take a hell of a lot of practice. Now, that being said, can the average person slap a dot on and say, ooh, dot go on target? Where dot go, bullet go? Yes, you can, but that's not how you use a dot. You're using a projector at that point. You're not actually using the dot advantageously. And again, we'll talk about that in the next episode of the podcast here. But many new users struggle with something I call chasing the dot. There is nothing worse than watching somebody press that gun out with a dot, and all of a sudden they're like, oh shit, I can't see it. So what do I see is this chasing the dot. They're rolling their wrists around, raising their hands up and down and left and right to try to find the dot and making all these weird adjustments. And then they finally find it and they pull the trigger and they're like, crap, I've got to do that again. And then they roll their wrists around and they raise their arms and lower their arms and bend their arms and do all sorts of crazy stuff. And they're chasing the dot. They're chasing the problem. The moment you start chasing the dot, you lost. You took too much time. You lost the advantage of that dot. And again, we'll talk about how to train away from chasing the dot, how to make sure that we're not doing that. But there's a learning curve here, guys. You have to learn how to use a red dot and how to use it appropriately. I've got to say, I'm venturing to say 80% of the people who walk into the store, walk into classes and stuff like that, who have a red dot are not using it correctly. And then when I show them a couple of quick things about how to actually use it correctly, it's like this epiphany goes off and they're like, oh, I was literally using that completely wrong the whole time. Thought it was more like a laser than it was a dot, right? So there is a bit of a learning curve there, and learn how to use it correctly. Don't create training scars. There can be durability concerns with these things. While some of your better optics can take abuse, cheaper ones can fail under recoil, dropped impacts, or extreme weather or temperatures, right? Not all red dots are created equal. For me, you've got to have a dot. And this is me personally, and we'll talk about differences on this, but I've got to have a dot that I can rely on that is rugged. Now, I do got to say, gone are the days where a rugged dot is, in order to get good rugged dots, you have to pay an arm and a leg for them. That is not the truth anymore. Now you can get good rugged dots in that lower price bracket now, but you've got to understand what that is first and foremost. So there can be durability concerns with red dots. Absolutely. You can have glass issues, right? You've got a reflective glass, right? And if you get dirt or water or fog or even lint from your shirt because it's been in that holster underneath your shirt for concealed carry, any of those things can block that emitter from reflecting on that glass or can distort the reticle or the image, making it next to impossible to see. If you got these things impeding that emitter from the LED to the glass, you're screwed. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about open versus closed emitter type optics. But you've got to make sure that that glass is clean. Or if it's cracked or broken, well, you may have a problem with that too. Costs can be prohibitive, right? That can be a con for red dots, right? A reliable pistol red dots aren't cheap. And then you've got to add in additional costs. So maybe we're into a good red dot, right? Maybe we're looking at a Holosun 407. We're looking around $200, $210, right? For a Holosun 407. Okay, so you're into it that. Well, unfortunately, you look down at your gun and realize you don't have a slide cut for optics. Now you got to send your slide off. And then you realize, well, I still need a mounting plate. Ah, crap. Now I can't co-witness my sights. I've got to get taller sights so that I get a co-witness picture out of them. So these things can add up. Absolutely. And they can add up fairly quickly. So while a good, reliable pistol red dot isn't cheap, it might not also be expensive, but as we start to add on the costs of mounting plates, backup iron sights, or even the possibility of having to cut the slide or get a new slide, this price can go up exponentially fast, right? I usually tell people when selecting a new firearm, future-proof yourself, right? Don't don't buy one that isn't RDS, isn't red dot ready, and then say, down the road, if I ever want one, I'll just have the slide cut and do all of that. One, not all slides can be cut for red dots. And two, you've pretty much just tripled the price of what it would have cost to have bought the same model, but red dot ready, if that is an option. So future-proof yourself. Even if you don't think that you're going to want a red dot anytime in the near future, just get one that's at least capable of it and keep the damn plate covering it. So, no harm, no foul. And I know this is going to piss some people off when I say this, but a con can be is they're not always ideal for close quarter combat. Yep, I'm going to let you mull on that one in your anger real quick, because I'm sure some of you tactical people are now screaming at me saying, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I do. See, I see and work with people all the way from civilians to competition shooters to regular police officers to the federal level and SWAT teams. And I work with them in extreme close ranges of shoot houses and stuff like that. Red dots can be prohibitive in close quarter combat. And this isn't the fault of the dot. This is the fault of the user and their training. At extreme close ranges, and I want you to think like bad guy within arm's reach, a dot can actually be slower than simply point shooting. Now, if you're unfamiliar with point shooting is basically going off instinct, saying that if I point this gun at the bad guy, I know I'm roughly where I want to be. I'm going to shoot, and I'm going to be really freaking accurate. Point shooting, right? So going off of that instinctual understanding of where my gun is pointing and where that bullet is going to go, point of aim, point of impact. In distances of close quarters where we're thinking extreme, right? That bad guy is within arm's reach. Do I need iron sights to hit that bad guy if they're within arm's reach? Do I need a dot to hit that bad guy if they're within arm's reach? The answer is no. If I simply press that gun out and I point shoot, I don't wait to see a dot. I don't wait to see irons. I just press out, and somewhere in my press out, I start rolling that trigger down. I will hit that bad guy. That's it. I've got it. I could absolutely hit that bad guy. But if I'm so ingrained through training scars that I must acquire my iron sights, even just a flashlight picture, or I must acquire a red dot before I shoot, in the close distance of extreme close quarter, that is going to take time, and time is not something that you have. You see what I'm saying? So before you swear at me, realize what I'm trying to say. This is not the fault of the dot or the irons that you've got. It's the fault of you and your training, of the necessity of needing to acquire those iron sights or those red dots. So when you're that freaking close to somebody, think, do I even need to use these in this distance? And start training certain distances where I am simply point shooting, right, while I'm doing those sorts of things. Again, not the fault of the optic as far as that goes. All right, so let's talk about some differences or different types of RDS or red dot sights. And we'll go into a big one that is like really, really big argument right now. Closed emitter versus open emitter. Let's talk about the most common one, that is open emitter first. This is going to be your traditional ones that you are used to seeing, like the SIG Romeo X, Holosun 407s or 507s, C's and K's, Trijicon RMRs, Holosun 507 comps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Open emitter is the most common type. And what is an open emitter? Well, you basically have a front objective lens, right? You've got that glass up at the front, and then a little bit behind that or closest to the shooter, you have an LED. That LED projects an image across that glass or onto that glass, and that's what you see. Boom. It's an open emitter because that red or green emitter or LED is open, right? It's basically open to that front glass objective lens, right? There's nothing interfering. There's nothing behind it. There's nothing enclosing or encircling it. It's just LED projects image onto dot. Now, what are the pros and cons of that type of an open emitter? Well, one, pro is going to be cost. It's going to be cheaper than closed emitter, right? There's less there. Next is sometimes going to be clarity, because you only have one piece of glass there and one thing to see. It can potentially be much clearer. We can see or have much smaller, medium, and larger sizes of them, where we can get really, really big, fancy type competition dots with much, much larger screens, which with much less body to interfere. It's basically a big chunk of glass with a small rim around it, right? So size of glass can be a difference between the two. Weight. Weight can be something. There's not very much weight to a lot of open emitters, so it's not going to impede or inhibit the tuning, right, of that firearm in any way, shape, or form, right, or reciprocating that slide back and forth, right? And we'll talk more about that when we get to closed emitter, but weight can be a pro of an open emitter when it comes to it. And in general, we just have a better, clearer picture, but everything's got pros, everything it's got cons, right? What's a con to an open emitter? Well, in the word open emitter, that's the problem with an open emitter. The problem with an open emitter is something can get in between that LED projecting the image on that glass. And if something gets between the LED and that glass, you got nothing. Imagine a piece of lint, right? Simply as innocent as a piece of lint or debris or paper or whatever gets into that open emitter and it gets in between the front objective lens or the glass and the LED. Guess what you don't have? An image. You got nada, nothing. So open emitters can have a problem because things can get in between there and it could stop that red dot from being functional, right? From you being able to see through it. The other problem could be is elements of weather, right? Dirt, mud, snow, rain can all get in between and can cause some sort of distortion or fogging or something towards that effect, right? So you do have some cons on those. And as we start to get a little bit bigger in the glass, well, the con could be that maybe they're not as rigid as they were when they were smaller or as their closed emitter. But I do find them to be extremely fast and they're less expensive. And I would say majority of my guns, probably 95% of my pistols have open emitter type red dot systems for them. So let's talk about the opposite, the opposing side of that. Closed emitter, or what we like to call the mailbox type. And that's exactly what it looks like, a freaking mailbox. So why do we call it a mailbox type or a closed emitter type? Well, that's because it's a closed system. So you have a front lens and a rear lens to it. So you have your front objective lens, you have your LED next that projects the image onto that front lens, and then you have a rear lens and then a body that encloses all of that. So that system is now enclosed between two pieces of glass, and most of the time it is gas purged, meaning that they force gas in there, create a pressure inside of there, purge out all of the things like straight oxygen and stuff like that. And that helps with some things we'll talk about into our pros or cons. But that's how it works. An enclosed or closed emitter is exactly as it sounds. It's a closed or enclosed system. So what are the pros and cons to that? Well, the pro to an enclosed system is we don't have to worry about things like debris in general getting trapped in between the emitter and the glass. That lint, that dust, that mud or that snow or that rain is not going to get in between the emitter and the front glass, so it'll always project a lens or an image on that front lens. And even if one of those lenses does have mud or dirt or debris, I can simply just wipe it off, and now I have the ability to see my image just by simply wiping it off. So it's a closed system. And since most of them are purged, we actually run some, if it's done well, we run less of a risk of it creating fog, right? Or condensation on the lens, because it's not going to allow these temperatures inside and out to vary a lot, causing that condensation, right? So a lot of times we don't have to worry about that. But that closed system can also be its con. Because if that's gas purged, right, and it's sealed or enclosed, if something breaks that seal, we now have a somewhat closed system that is now going to have variance in its temperature, which is now going to gain condensation and moisture inside of it that I can't take out, and I'm going to get almost like permanent fogging inside there, which kind of screws the pooch. Or if small particulates do get inside because maybe a seal has broken, getting it out is going to be next to impossible, so now it's bouncing around inside there. Another problem is if you have two lenses, right, separated by a distance or a body, you have to make sure that those are more lined up, or else you're going to wind up seeing the walls or the ceiling and the floor of the body of the inside of that optic. So it's a little bit harder to see through that if it's not lined up accordingly or properly. Plus, most of the time, it is a smaller picture than it is on a lot of other types of open emitters. Not all, but most, right, when it comes to that. Another one is its bulky size and its weight. And sometimes there are some holsters that just don't like to work with closed emitter stuff, right? Now let's talk about that size and weight, though, also being a problem on the cycling of that reciprocating mass of that slide. See, when your gun comes from the factory, for the most part, it comes from the factory with a recoil spring that is meant to handle and mitigate the mass moving of the slide coming back, right? And the type of rounds that you are shooting out of it, and sprung a little bit over to accommodate for a little bit of extra weight of maybe a mounting plate and a red dot system. But I have seen a lot of heavy closed emitters creating problems with a factory tuning on a firearm, where all of a sudden we're getting failures of that firearm. We're getting failure to extract, which cause failure to feed. And we're seeing all of these sort of small little failures where now we have to tune our firearms to ensure that our firearm works correctly with the additional mass and weight of a closed emitter mailbox type RDS. So pros and cons. What are some of those closed emitter types? Well, we're looking at like Aimpoint Acros, Hollow Sun EPS. The Steiner is the Steiner MPS. That's got a question mark to it. I always screw that one up. I think it's the Steiner MPS. And the new SIG Romeo X enclosed. These are going to be that closed emitter type for that. So next, let's kind of get in the conversation of dot colors. Oh my God, this is literally what almost every new customer asks about, which is great. I love it, right? Get educated on it, ask the question, but it always falls down to, what do I need, red or green? And then my answer is, I don't know what you need. I have no idea what you need. Let's talk about the differences between red or green, and then you make an educated decision based off of that, or more importantly, let's hold them up and see what your eyes actually think. So red versus green. Now, are there other ones? Yeah, there are a few other colors out there. We've seen amber, we've seen blue. There's all sorts of crazy stuff out there, but red and green in general are your most popular ones. So what's the difference between red or green? Well, they're different colors. Yep, like Christmas, red and green. No. But they're different colors, and those different colors help them have an advantage in different light spectrums or different light types, let's call it. So let's look at red first. Red in general works the best from a mid-light, right? A nice mid-light to darker light, or less light, let's call it, to darker environments. But don't fare as well in very, 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 very bright light. Now, green, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. It does really well in mid-light spectrums, just like red does. They're kind of on an even playing field there. But green has more of an advantage in brighter light than red does, but does a little not as good in darker environments. Now, that being said, people will say that's not the truth. That's just the way light spectrum works, right? And it is kind of the truth. But here's where it really it's not really that important. And that's because it really doesn't make a difference what light spectrum things are better at. It's what works better for you. See, our eyes individually will dictate whether red or green is good for us as an individual. I run red dots on almost everything, and I've run them from night vision to really dark with your regular eyes to mids to brights to whatever, and they work damn good. And I've run green in the exact same thing, and they work really, really good. It doesn't make a difference to me whether I run a red or a green, but there are some students or some customers I've had where we will put a red dot in their hands, and because of issues with their eyes, right? It could be all sorts of different stuff that could be happening with their eyes, that a red dot blooms out really bad. And no matter what they do, it's got this giant starburst going on. And then you put a green one on in the same brightness, and it's just fine. They have no problem with it. It doesn't irritate, give them a headache. It doesn't starburst. It doesn't bloom. So green worked better for that particular individual, but that's because they had a specific type of astigmatism, right? And astigmatisms can really throw off which dot is going to work best for you. But then you can put 2 dots in the next person's hands and green blooms out for them real bad, whereas red works really well. So yes, does red have an advantage in certain light spectrums and does green have an advantage in certain light spectrums? Sure, they do. Very, very not noticeable. Most people will have no idea. Realistically speaking, though, you've got to put these in your hands. You've got to push them out in front of your face like you're shooting with them, and you've got to try them. Point them into the dark, point them into the bright, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and see which one works for you. It doesn't really make it different which one works in better light spectrums. On paper or in theory, it's what works best for you, right? The next is reticles. This can get dizzying for people. What are the reticles? What is the actual image that you're seeing pushed onto that front objective glass? Red dots. Well, you would think that it would just be a dot, but it's not. We had to complicate shit. In general, you can have a standard reticle, which is just a plain old dot. And you can have a small little itty bitty dot, like a 2 MOA dot. MOA is the way that we measure the size of that dot. A 3 MOA, a 6 MOA, an 8 MOA. And these dots get exponentially smaller or bigger depending on that number. The smaller the number, the smaller the dot. The higher the number, the higher the dot. You can have circles, right, which are open in the middle. It's just a circle, an outlined circle, right? Again, in MOAs, 32 MOA, 64 MOA, a bajillion MOA, and the bigger the number, the bigger that circle. You can have dot circles. You can have circle, circle, dot. You can have circle, dot, triangle. You can have up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, select, start. That's an Easter egg for all you old-timey nerds that played Nintendo and played like Contra. Yeah, you'd know what I was talking about if you're an old NES fan and Contra rules. But anyways, you can have a myriad of different types of reticles, from dots to circles to multiple circles, multiple dots, triangles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These all have different advantages to them, pros and cons, right? Why is having just a dot good? It's fast, right? I mean, all you got to think of is the dot. Where the dot is, bullet goes. Boop, fast. It has a little bit more precision to it, right? Because it can be slightly smaller. So the smaller the dot, the more precise I can be, but slightly slower to pick up potentially, right? As the dot gets bigger, it can start overshadowing your target. It can start being bigger than your target depending on that distance. Then you can have a circle. Well, the cool part about an outlined circle is the entire center of it is a clear image, which means I can still see my threat through the center of the clear image, but the circle itself will tell me that anything within the confines of this circle will get a bullet in it, right? So you can use it to measure off. As long as this circle is within the confines of shoulder to shoulder on a human-sized analog target or threat, I will wind up hitting that threat. And then there's dot circle, which is a combination, which gives you kind of the best of both worlds, but can start to get a little busy. And then you can have circle, circle, dot, or any combination thereof, which is supposed to give you an advantage of all of those things. But there is a point where it starts to become a little too busy, where having too much information is kind of just that, too much information. We start to lose the information of the threat in the environment because we're too busy seeing the garbage that's clogging up our reticle, right? Now, there are some dots where you can switch between these, where you can switch between a dot or a circle or a big circle or a dot and a circle or a circle, circle and a dot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's cool because you can tailor it and you can figure out which one you like the most and you can go from there, right? Holosun is real big on that. The new SIG, you can multi-reticle, you can switch through them. So it's pretty cool and you can figure out where it is. But there is a point where too much does become too much. Too much information kind of takes the advantage away from what the red dot is. Imagine taking like a long-range precision scope, right? That has all of these, BDC bullet drop compensation, all this doping marks and hash marks and movement marks and all of that. And imagine throwing that in a tiny little screen or objective lens of an RDS on a pistol. You see what I'm saying? It's already too busy for something like a big rifle scope, so it's going to be really, really, really busy on something like a pistol. But find what's right for you. Find what you like and roll with it. Now, not all types of RDS are exactly the same, right? We have ones that are made for different purposes, right? And that's how we can kind of start to gauge which one we need, right? For example, there are competition-driven ones, which have really huge windows to them, really big glass to them. A great example of that is the SIG Romeo 3 Max. That's one of my favorite competition reticles. It's ginormous, right? You can't miss anything in it. So you've got a really, really big picture window on it. The 507 Comp from HoloSun is huge. SRO is a nice size to it too, but these give you this big giant window to see through, right? So I can see more things in that glass, allowing me to acquire my next target faster, right? So huge advantage there for it. But the problem is usually they are not as strong or rigid, because now with a bigger chunk of glass in there, a lot of times you'll have less framing around that, right? And it'll be a little bit more of a sensitive type of optic. So are they good for EDC and tactical and duty? Usually not, because they're a lot more sensitive to shock and drop and all of that sort of stuff, because it's not built for it, right? It's built for competition. Then we go to the next one, which is EDC, tactical and duty types, right? These are going to be the ones that are not as big. I mean, they can get big, don't get me wrong. They can be small, but they're really made to be strong, to be very rigid and rugged, to have good battery life to them, to withstand different temperatures, to withstand elements and stuff like that, and to really just take a lot of abuse, right? And that's because they have to. If this is a dot that I'm going to put on my EDC gun, or that I'm using for tactical or duty, I want to make sure that this dot works no matter what, right? It's all about rugged for me and picture quality for me with an EDC, tactical or duty type. And you're going to pay a little bit for them, don't get me wrong. If you want to see me abuse the hell out of some optics, go check out the D5 Ranges Marengo YouTube channel and check out some of the torture tests I do on some dots. But that's because I have a lot of requirements for EDC, tactical and duty red dots. These things got to be able to survive the shit. I've got to know that if it gets dropped, right, or if it hits something, or if I fall on my gun in a holster and it hits that object, that it's not going to throw off my zero, that it's not going to break the lens, that it's not going to short circuit the whole damn thing, that I have to be able to rack it off of just about anything, because I have an injured arm and I only have one arm to use. I need to be able to use that optic as my point to rack things, right, for advantage. So the EDC, the tactical, and the duty, they've got to be rugged and rigid, right, and have of good quality. And then last but not least is the cheapo, right? Is there a place for it? Yeah. It's a range queen or a safe queen. Yes, you can get a cheap shit dot, and it doesn't have to be rugged. It doesn't have to have good quality. It doesn't have to be do anything. And if it's just mounted to the gun that you take to the range every once in a while, or mounted to the gun that, you know, sits in your safe, I mean, I guess who really cares? Me personally, I wouldn't waste my money on them. I'd save up a little bit of pennies and get a better one. But these things aren't meant to be big picture windows. They're not meant to be great for competition. They're not meant to be rugged or have good battery life or have good adjustability for EDC, tactical, and duty. These are just, I want to put a dot on to put a dot on, right? So there's different dots for different applications. They're not all created equal. Next would be the quality of that optic. And this is going to go back to that range queen one versus all of the other ones. Can you get a dot from Temu? Yeah, you can. But you know what's going to happen? There's a good chance it's going to fly off on you because you're going to shear the screws. There's a good chance that when you go to adjust it, it's going to strip the adjustment for windage and elevation. I've seen the pieces of glass, well, if they're actually glass, just go flying down the range for people. Or simply through that slide coming back and forth and that reciprocating mass coming to a screeching halt and then slamming back forward. I've seen them just literally crumble apart into pieces. So while they might be okay for your fancy schmancy airsoft gun, not real good for your actual pistol that has, like, you know, explosions and shit going off in it. So there are definitely differences in quality of optics. Again, save your money, get a good dot. There's really not a huge difference in cost between the lesser expensive ones and the really good ones, right? You're going to be looking at about $215-ish for a good high quality optic or more. Now, that being said, money doesn't always mean everything when it comes to a dot. Yes. Do you have some of the best from Trijicon? You do. Is it necessary to buy one of those? No, not in the slightest bit. In fact, I don't own any of them because they're just not necessary. I've beat the piss out of and the living hell out of and used optics for things they should have never been used for, and they've stood up to it, and they were a fraction of the cost of some of the Trijicon options. I'm not saying, and I'm not crapping all over your Trijicon people. Listen, I know some of you just bleed Trijicon, right? But there are other options out there that are extremely good for less money, right? And again, the Trijicons are still fucking great. They're awesome optics. Sorry, Trigi people. I didn't mean to poop all over you, but it's the way it is. There are other options out there. Sorry, not sorry. Next is going to be battery life, right? If these things got a battery, they got battery life that we've got to worry about. When you're looking at things like the Holosuns, you're looking at like, what, 50,000 hours or something like that. And then some of them also have, some sort of solar power, solar backup for it. Even ones that don't have those, you're still seeing major lifespan with them, 30, 40,000 hours. And they're getting better and better and better every year. Battery life is getting extended out. But that still does mean you have to change that battery, right? I change my batteries twice a year. Get yourself on a schedule, right? So I luck out. My birthday falls at the very end of May. So I'm like smack dab in the middle of the year. Like, it couldn't get any more perfect than that. So I use my birthday as the place that I wake up on my birthday for the most part. I get up in the morning. I change all the batteries on all my optics. That's it. Nice and easy. And then on New Year's Day, when everybody's all hungover and slow, I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I get up, I go downstairs, I change out all the batteries on all my optics, and I know I'm good, right? So 2 times a year, I have a maintenance schedule to change out my batteries on my optics. Do I have to? I don't. Will they last more than 6 years? Yeah, they probably will. See, a lot of them have some of this new technology like Shake Awake, right? Where it's turned off until you shake it and it wakes up, right? Which means if it's not doing anything, it's off. It's awesome. I don't have to remember to turn them off. Some of them even have like this magnet technology. So while it's in your holster, it's not getting shaken awake, right? While it's in your holster, it's shut off. The minute it breaks that magnetic field, it automatically turns it on, and you've got a dot ready to go just as it's getting released from that holster, keeping the battery shut off or the optic shut off the whole time it's in your holster. I think that's SIG's technology, if I'm not mistaken. So the life expectancy of these batteries is getting extended more and more and more, but just do yourself a favor, get on some sort of a schedule when it comes to maintaining your battery. All right. That's for the most part about it, right? This is more of like a beginner getting and understanding this dot so you can make a more informed decision on whether you want to run a dot and what type of dot is the right dot for you. Now, next episode, we're going to talk about learning how to use a dot, training with a dot, and different methods and sighting and how to zero these things. All of that is going to be on our next episode. So please stay tuned for that next episode and check it out when it comes out. And as always, thank you very, very, very much for listening to this episode. I really appreciate this, and I do this for you. And remember, red dots do offer huge advantages, but they aren't like a magic solution or a magic bullet. But if you put in the time and learn and maintain them, they can absolutely improve your shooting, right? But if you're not ready to commit to a learning curve or regular battery swaps or throwing a couple extra bucks into get a good one, you might just want to stick with the free plan and go with the iron sights. All right, thank you very much, everybody, and I'll see you next time. All right, you're still listening, which means you might have heard the last episode where I talked about there's potentially Easter eggs at the end. There really isn't one here. I didn't really have anything to say. I'm just use this time to apologize to SIG. I really hate the Romeo Zero optic. I think it's terrible. Every optic you make is good, with the exception of that one. It's garbage, but we can still be friends, right, SIG? Right? Even though you make a crappy optic like a Romeo Zero. But every optic you make besides that one, I love. So keep up the good work. All right. You make great guns, great optics. Later.